Hi guys, my name is Ken and I'm part of the group Jolly Ranchers. And I chose to study US industrial agriculture because food is one of those things that we can all agree on in the sense that we all need it and depend on it. And I think there's a serious lack of education about food and where food comes from and how much energy we use to put our food on the table. So, with that said, let me introduce you to the rest of the group and we'll talk about US industrial agriculture.
Hello, my name is Gabrielle, and I'm another member of the Jolly Ranchers. I wanted to learn more about industrial agriculture because I'm interested in how we alter our environment to fit our needs. I'm passionate about green building and sustainable design. I want to broaden my understanding of other constructed features in our society. Our food system is always going to be a necessary fixture. By researching this wicked problem, it is possible parallels can be drawn to other constructed parts of our community. Gathering different perspectives can only strengthen our resolution tactics, and I look forward to getting new insights I may not have considered before.
Hi, my name is Nevenka and I'm from New Jersey. The reason that I chose industrial agriculture is because I wanted to be better informed about a topic that I believe to be so important. Food affects everybody, and as I go through this journey of sustainability, I want to learn what I can actually do to make a difference. I believe that we need to change the way that we've been treating our limited water, our limited land, and our air quality. Scientists continue to warn us that we need to change the way that we're treating Mother Earth. I believe with better informed individuals, we can make real change.
Hi everyone, my name is Ariana Chanel Everett and I'm a part of Team Jolly Ranchers. Growing up in the city that I did, fast food was always the easy option for myself and those around me. Not only were these types of restaurants everywhere, but the food itself was much cheaper than any other alternative. Unfortunately, the consumption of processed food over a long period of time can lead to a variety of health issues such as high blood pressure or heart disease. I chose to focus on industrial agriculture because I believe it is important for everyone to have access to fresh, affordable food no matter where you're from.
Hi, my name is Jordan Raidman. I'm a member of Team Jolly Ranchers, and our group is focused on the issue of industrial agriculture, which I chose in favor of other wicked problems to focus on because, as someone who feels a deep sense of connection to trees and rainforests and, in general, terrestrial biodiversity, the consequences of industrial agriculture feel particularly salient to me. I feel a personal and global sense of deep loss as unsustainable agriculture practices continue to destroy our natural resources through deforestation, and I plan on dedicating my entire career to helping reinvent industrial farming so that it not only is sustainable and more economically efficient, but carbon negative. I think that we can alleviate poverty, reforest devastated landscapes, and improve the livelihoods of agriculturalists around the world through innovative permaculture, and I fully intend on being a part of that movement.
So, what is the history and evolution of US industrial agriculture? Well, about 15,000 years ago, humans were hunters and gatherers, and we depended on the food that was directly around us in order to survive. And we didn't begin farming until the first agricultural revolution, where we started domesticating plants and animals, and that was about 10 to 12,000 years ago. And then in the 1960s, our technologies started to advance in the developing countries, and we were able to speed up the food production, which allowed us to supply food for our populations to grow. And then instead of using animals like cows, to provide fertilizer or use them for plowing, we switched to using machinery, which was easier and less work, and we started to use man-made fertilizers in order to speed up our production. And with all of that, we started to consume all kinds of resources, and inevitably we started to cause environmental problems and other social problems, and that's become a wicked problem.
Stakeholders. Who are the four main stakeholders of industrial agriculture? First, large corporate farms are key stakeholders. They are also primary and active actors and spatially upstream. Large corporate farms have a positive influence on the urban food demands while having a negative influence on downstream communities. Large corporate farms' norms include using technology to make land, plants, and animals as profitable as possible. Examples include monoculture, synthetic fertilizers, and CAFOs. Beliefs for large corporate farms are that industrial agriculture practices are the most profitable method. Values for large corporate farms are that profits and dominance of the markets are important with minimal competition. Another main stakeholder are downstream localities. Downstream localities are primary stakeholders and active actors. They are spatially downstream, and on the influence and interest matrix, they are subjects. Norms include that they may utilize industrial agricultural practices as well, but water sources are important to their local economy. This may include fishing, shipping, or irrigation. Beliefs for downstream localities are that pollution upstream degrades the quality of water flowing downstream, hindering water-dependent industries. Values for downstream localities are clean water for stable economies and human welfare. Another stakeholder are urban localities. Urban localities are key stakeholders and secondary and active actors. Spatially, they are in high-density populated areas. On the influence and interest matrix, they are context setters, with a positive influence for farms. Norms include high consumption rates and are prone to food waste. Norms also include high vehicle use and use of biofuels due to regulations. Beliefs for urban localities include that large corporate farms are needed to meet the food demand. They also believe that local and organic food may cost more. Meat is important for diets, and cars offer efficient transportation. Values for urban localities are readily available food and on-demand transportation. Lastly, governments are another key stakeholder in industrial agriculture. Governments are primary and active actors. On the influence and interest matrix, they are key players. Governments have a negative influence on downstream communities with a positive influence to large corporate farms. Norms for governments include subsidies for farm insurance premiums. These subsidies may have complicated qualifications to encourage high production of cash crops. Governments also practice lax antitrust enforcement and create policies for biofuel use. Beliefs for governments include that the technology and subsidies make farms more resilient. They also believe that soy and corn are versatile and lucrative. Lastly, big corporations are believed to be on the front line for research and development, which may help farms be more resilient to any changes in the environment that may destabilize the system. Finally, values for governments may include high production rates and resiliency of farm industry, as well as profitable industries for strong economy.
What we're going to look at in this section is some of the main primary actions and what impacts them. One of the primary actions of industrial agriculture is monocropping. Like any business, farming corporations and small farmers are trying to maximize their profits. Monocropping allows them to use the same tools year to year. Not only can they use the same techniques, they actually have a chance to improve on them from the previous year. Another thing that affects monocropping are genetically modified seeds. Not only do farmers have to sign a contract saying they will continue to grow the GMO seeds, which limits their selection of crops, but farmers also end up depending on the GMO seeds due to their increased resilience to diseases. Synthetic fertilizing is another action that we're going to be looking at. Soil depletion is directly connected with monocropping. What it does to the soil is that it strips the nutrients from the soil each year, and farmers must apply synthetic fertilizer to return those nutrients back into the soil to grow their crops and try to maximize it as much as possible. Synthetic fertilizer is also more cost-effective than organic. You can apply less and get a better result. Although there are many different variables that affect industrial agriculture that we couldn't cover in these slides, one thing that it does seem to be a trend is farmers trying to maximize their profits year by year. Here on the graph, you can see that although incomes have risen, so has cash expenses for farms.
Now that you've heard some of the primary actions that led to the problem of industrial agriculture, let's further discuss the positive and negative impacts of these actions. At its inception, the theory of monocropping was seen as a brilliant new way to advance agriculture, but the downsides would become clear as the years and applications went on. For one, monocropping can lead to soil degradation. This occurs when a lack of crop rotation depletes the soil of vital nutrients, leaving it vulnerable to things such as erosion. Monocropping can also cause crop dependency, and relying on a single crop, or worse, a single species of crop, is dangerous. A perfect example of this is the corn blight of 1970, where 15% of our corn crop was destroyed by a widespread disease that affected the species of corn, which accounted for 85% of the country's corn crop at the time. Monocropping can encourage biodiversity loss. This could lead to an increased use of synthetic fertilizers, which has its own set of impacts I will explain later on. Lastly, monocropping furthers the misuse of water. The synthetic fertilizers pollute our water bodies, and the irrigation systems needed to support it require large amounts of water that are increasingly unstable. Next, let's look at fossil fuel-based farming. One of the main negative impacts is its usage of non-renewable resources, which further depletes our already limited supply. Fossil fuel-based farming also increases energy consumption because it is necessary for things like the production of fertilizers or packaging materials, or in order to run large-scale irrigation operations. This inherently leads to an increase of greenhouse gas emissions, adding to those that are produced from things such as farming machinery or the transportation of crops. Finally, let's look at synthetic fertilization. As I just mentioned, fossil fuels are necessary for the production of synthetic fertilizers, which in turn creates greenhouse gas emissions that pollute the air. The use of the fertilizers release high levels of chemicals into the ground, which can over-fertilize crops, cause soil degradation leading to increased runoff, or pollute the groundwater. As you can see at the bottom left of the flowchart, air and groundwater pollution are particularly harmful because it becomes cyclical as they enter the hydrologic cycle. Monocropping, fossil fuel-based farming, and synthetic fertilization have a complex range of negative impacts that are often interconnected. Their positive impacts, on the other hand, are pretty straightforward. These actions made farming simpler and more efficient. New technologies were developed and less knowledge was needed to be successful. They led to high yields, which meant affordable food for the consumer, and along with things like the consolidation of supplies, reduced costs and increased profits for producers small and large.
So what drives industrial agriculture? Let's talk about some of the direct and indirect drivers of this wicked problem. First, wealthy diets. An increased demand for animal products requires significantly more resources than plant-based foods. This includes land usage, water usage, crop yields, etc. Also, increased demand for attractive produce requires a lot higher usage of pesticides and GMOs. Wealthy diets often require pretty produce to satisfy consumers. An increased demand for foods that have a longer shelf life also is an indirect driver of industrial agriculture, and it requires a lot more GMOs and foods filled with preservatives and covered in pesticides to be grown. Also, there's an increased demand for higher quantities of crop per capita compared to lower income countries, people who consume less food on average. Next, financial insecurity, more specifically in a capitalist climate. Many people can't afford to shop organically and responsibly if it isn't the absolute most financially accessible option. When they can barely afford to feed their families low-quality foods to begin with, shopping responsibly simply always isn't available. Farmers also don't have the option of making larger initial investments for sustainable farming techniques all the time, even when it results in more income over longer periods. Instead, they require the more immediate financial rewards that come with increased crop production using things like fertilizers, pesticides, GMOs, etc., alongside lower startup costs. Poor families and societies also have a less stable birth rate, as families with less healthcare options tend to have more children to increase the likelihood of one or two surviving into adulthood. This contributes to unsustainable population growth, and that requires more food to be mass-produced. Financial insecurity also results in less people being able to receive an education, where they would have the opportunity to learn about the environmental impact of industrial agriculture, or of more efficient and sustainable ways of farming. Let's talk about weak government policies. Insufficient legislation regulation on chemicals that can be used on food products definitely is an issue here. People can use all kinds of chemicals that are definitely unsafe for humans to be consuming on produce. Insufficient legislation on protecting rainforests and other types of land also is a problem. Lots of rainforests that should be protected to protect biodiversity are cleared for agricultural endeavors. More specifically, they're cleared at an extremely unsustainable rate, which is much faster than the rate at which we can reforest the land. Also, there are insufficient regulations for companies to import their unsustainable food products from areas of the world with fewer agricultural regulations. Lastly, large agricultural corporations can even bribe government officials in areas with weak government policies to pass legislation and deregulate their industry in ways which make it increasingly unsustainable. Next, poor education. A lack of education on the climate crisis and how industrial agriculture contributes to it is definitely a problem. People can't solve an issue and work towards a more sustainable solution if they don't know that the issue begins in the first place. There's also a lack of education for farmers on sustainable agriculture and increasingly modern and efficient farming techniques. There's also the problem of lack of proper nutrition education in developing nations, meaning that families often purchase lower quality foods with higher environmental impacts without realizing the health or environmental consequences, which impact a society's affluence and health. People also don't know how to supplement animal products healthily, nor are healthy alternatives always an option when the lack of knowledge on their importance keeps the supply and demand low. There's also insufficient funding for public education, limited opportunities for people to increase financial success, which would allow them to afford high quality and more sustainable products. And finally, the global fossil fuel dependency. There's an extremely high demand for biofuel, and much of agriculture includes deforesting land to grow plants such as palm or soy to be harvested and turned into highly demanded biofuel, which can be found blended with petroleum fuels for transportation purposes, but are also found in everyday products for affluent societies, such as cosmetics.
Sprayers, tractors, trucks, crop dusters, plows, and other farming equipment are also often used in industrial agriculture because they are more efficient than hiring individual laborers to do the same work. These fossil fuel consuming machines are the only types of machines with this function that are economically accessible for many farmers, and farmers continue to use them because they depend on them to produce enough products to profit. When the competition is fierce, people don't always have the option of making less money and moving more slowly in order to be responsible. Because the planet depends on fossil fuels, agriculture must be industrialized, as many of the products end up being transported continents away from the farms. Consequently, to survive in a competitive market, farmers must industrialize and export their products by means of using even more fossil fuels. The industrialized world has a very fast pace of living. In the industrialized world dependent on fossil fuels, there's a higher demand for unsustainable fast food products, products imported from less regulated countries, products packaged in plastics, grown with fertilizers, pesticides, and farm machinery, GMOs, and more. What can be purchased through a drive-through, so that people living busy lifestyles in industrialized parts of the world are often not sustainable products, but people can obtain sustenance quickly and on the go through these methods, even though it's not sustainable.